we stand for and what we don't stand for. I mean, what we don't get involved with. So it is my pleasure today to introduce to all of you Mr. Mike Urban. Mike came to Pullman in March of 2019 as our finance director. And for the last 6 months, he has been both the finance director and the city administrator. He was just sharing with Bobby and I what his wife thinks about all of that, and how she's so happy that it's about to end because a new person has been hired for finance director, and her name is Jonna Davis. I've heard Mike give a presentation similar to what he's going to talk about today, because I am the league observer to the city council, and he's a very, very sharp and articulate presenter. Mike will do two things. He'll talk about the challenges of the past year during COVID and the adjustments that had to be made by our city. And he's going to give a little bit of a preview of the 2021 budget and what the plans are going into this next year. We're asking that you submit your questions in chat or write them down for later so that Mike can get through his slides. So I hope that's okay with everybody. That's how we plan to proceed. Okay, Mike, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Libby and Bobby, for inviting me, and everybody for choosing to spend your lunch hour listening about finance. You're a special breed and you're my people. Thank you. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation I'd like to put up, but just so you know, when I do these things live, I like to be able to see which hands are going up, and there may be something pertinent on the slides. So when I go into presentation mode, I'm not going to be able to see folks raising their hands. I'm going to rely on Libby and Bobby to certainly interrupt me for the question, and I'll ask at the end of each slide if there's any questions before proceeding, and then we can get to some at the end as well. And there's a point for that. So again, thank you for having me. I look forward to talking some of this. If you've been watching council, you'll have seen in different places, but at the end, I got 2 slides that are brand new to everybody. They're going to be part of our State of the City presentation with the Chamber of Commerce on the 11th. So there is some effort in putting in the whole deal to a new presentation here. So let's get started with my screen share, and that's where I want to be. All right, and can everybody see the greeting slide, City of Pullman financial update?
Yes.
Great. And this is where I apologize for doing the no look meeting, because I have 2 different screens, cameras here. So I'm going to go back and forth. I'm not multitasking. I'm focused, single-minded, focused on what we're doing here. So I'm going to apologize right now. One of the things I've been working on as a New Year's resolution is balancing brevity and thoroughness. So I hope I did okay by the end of this. So we'll get into the whole bit here. So let's chug along to the first one. So city finances in the age of COVID. It just so happened I did get here just about a year before this happened. And one of the first things I did when I got here is I looked at how did the city of Pullman weather the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, that whole piece. And I was kind of pleased to find that they weathered it fairly well compared to where I left. I grew up in the Skagit Valley in Mount Vernon, and to the point I was elected to the Mount Vernon City Council at the end of 2007. And by our first meeting in February in 2008 with a budget whose ink wasn't even dry yet, we were asking to cut $1.5 million from the budget. So having to live through a time of all these grand plans and things we want to do versus just keeping the lights on was not something I have not seen before. That's why I didn't panic. I just started looking at things and how we can continue to provide services for the citizens of Pullman, not knowing what the long-term outcome was going to be. So the first thing that we did, Adam Lincoln, the city administrator before me, got us all together. By the end of March, we had already had 2 meetings with every department to talk about their budget and their operations and what expenses could be curtailed. And while we continue to provide services under the limited guidance, certainly things like the library and recreation, we weren't allowed to perform services. So some of those reductions were, right in front of our face. But things that we had to keep providing, and probably we were going to provide more of: fire with responses, police, all the infrastructure with utilities had to keep going. So a little bit of financial triage happened, and I kept telling them after we met with every meeting, and we were rubbing our temples, it's like we're still doing all right for our first pandemic. So that initial response, we started looking at is what expenditures could we curtail, and then we jumped into with what are our revenue concerns. If there's less people in town, what does that do to sales tax? Admissions tax certainly was wiped out. Are people going to pay their property taxes? Or is our unemployment rate going to go up enough where they're going to hold those things back? So a lot of sitting in on statewide meetings, regional meetings, looking at projections from the Office of Financial Management, went into our how far do we go, before we pull too hard on that rubber band and it snaps. Things that we instituted in our organization, not knowing what the virus was and how it transmitted and how easy it was to transmit, is get all of our critical staff remoted. Those folks that can work remotely from their homes or switching schedules, all the things that you've heard before. How do we do that? But how do we continue to provide the presence of fire and police, and making sure our utilities run properly were super important to us, because as we're telling people to wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands, we better be providing the water, and the water needs to go somewhere. So we looked at all sorts of deployment models so we can keep our crews safe, that if somebody ended up testing positive, how do we react to that, isolate them, continue to keep the mechanism that is the city of Pullman and your city government operating. And the biggest thing we did was, a lot of our continuing ed and recertifications, they started restricting travel on us. That's just something we've kept doing as a matter of policy right now until we know we can send people out to a class or some sort of operations deal, because everybody is embracing Zoom, not with both arms sometimes, but certainly embracing it as a platform, from our universities down to, my trade associations, for training in that. So not traveling, which we've done a lot of in the city organization because we are so remote, to get training, I think saved a lot of people from, one, getting sick, and two, there was a lot of dollars that could be held back. So one of the things that jumped out at us right as this was going on was the CARES grant. And I know there's been a lot of talk on that over the last several months, as I'm trying to identify different projects and get direction from council to bring back items that we could do to benefit the community, but fit in this narrow definition of what is eligible. So the feds gave us 2 bites at the apple on this. The first one, just over $1 million, $1,035,000. And then right as the CARES grant was coming to the end, not sooner, when it would have been nicer to have it to plan, but I'm never going to look $500,000 in the face and say, if only. It's thank you, and here's what we're going to try to do with that. So yeah, the feds stepped up. And this is an important note later in my presentation when we're talking about my philosophy on reserves. But the feds had stepped in and made some dollars available to help us respond to the pandemic. And on top of what we did internally as a city to buoy our general fund, we provided some business assistance to small businesses to help them continue through that, our economic development department was helping businesses provide, apply for PPP loans. And there was dollars sent up to the hospital to help with testing. So it was, you know, by the time it was said and done, there was about 475,000 of that 1.5 million spent completely externally of the city operations to help community continue to survive and recover from this. So the Pullman police are one of the few in the state. Their response to this was the actual enforcement of the governor's proclamations. Citations for large gatherings certainly helped keep our numbers down, and they continue to do that today. And so they had their response as well, while we were trying to figure out ways to make sure when they got on scene, because a lot of times it's dial 911. There's a little snippet of what's going on, but they're arriving on the scene without a whole lot more information, and making sure our staff is protected on what might be going out there. There was a few potential exposures where we had staff get tested, isolate, wait for the test to come back. And in general, between all of our first responders and city staff, we've stayed generally healthy. There's been a few exceptions to that, where we've had some folks that have been sick or very sick, but everybody is on the mend and continuing to recover from that. Our fire response, again, there was the medical portion of it where we do provide advanced life support to our neighboring communities. And what's coming through our doors, other than, you know, when you hear a call, flu-like symptoms, it's like, okay, what is it, flu-like, or is it something worse? And, you know, keeping our folks safe, making sure that we have equipment for them to be able to work on patients by limiting potential exposures to our staff, because how important it is. If one person on a shift gets it and spreads it, then that changes the whole dynamic of a response and how we do that. So fire's done a very good job of keeping themselves and their coworkers healthy. And to the point, I've also added the note about occupancy on there, that as we started to get into phase 3 and heard concerns about the community, we've started to send the fire marshals out, going into the weekends, helping police look at potential places that were not obeying the proclamations, making sure our businesses, especially our eating and drinking establishments, were obeying the 50% capacity limitations. Were they distancing? Were they masking? And, you know, to our businesses' credit, every time the fire marshals came through, they were in compliance, wanting to keep us in phase 3, because we all know that their 50% operation still isn't enough to break even. So having to continue to move the businesses forward, move phases forward so they can recover as well, was very critical to them. So they've been very helpful to, you know, police themselves and cooperative with city staff. The utilities, as I mentioned, we're asking folks to, you know, wash their hands frequently, and we do have a declining aquifer, but, you know, the community health is very, 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 very important. So we continue to keep those fully operational, to the point where council, even before the governor proclaimed anything, council said, stop the shutoffs. There's no shutoffs for late bills, no late fees, no, you know, hookup. That it's just, all of that's going to be waived until we get through this. It's, the community needs to, you know, band together on this. So although the governor did make his proclamation, the city council was ahead of that and thinking about the benefits of this to the community. Unfortunately, there was some normal services that have been interrupted simply because we can't aggregate in one place, or do we know how the virus was transmitting, in close proximity via particulates? So recreation and library and our parks department, to a certain degree, we were still able to go out and do some work with parks and continue to keep the parks open, but not in the traditional sense that we were used to. Library operations went down to almost zero until the state gave us guidance to allow curbside, and Joanna Bailey, our library director, was right on top of that the second that we could start doing that, and did a very aggressive curbside delivery program. And then as recreation has been slowly allowing to recommence some things, getting the pool back open, getting kids programs back together, because there was a lot of kids, because I have one of them at home who have a lot of energy that they need to burn off. So although it doesn't look like it did last summer, or it's starting to look like this spring, that we know there's pent up demand, and we're making sure our community can restart in a healthy manner and bring those operations back up. But those groups really, took the brunt of it, while we continued the basic operations of continuing the to provide services to the community. So that's kind of how we looked at it from an additional response to the pandemic. From this slide forward, we really get into the hardcore financials. So before I switch over, are there any questions pending out there, Libby or Bobby? Okay, I see shaking of heads. So now we get into the fun stuff. The reason I originally came here, let's talk about money. We're gonna, sales tax revenue. All right, let me make sure I didn't, yep, I did, there it is. All right, so I got a little trigger finger there, I apologize. So let's talk about the general fund, and I want to set up some thoughts at the beginning, and I apologize if some of this is rudimentary or redundant, but we spend a lot of time focusing on discussing the general fund around here, and that's because it lives outside of our enterprise funds, like our utilities. Our utilities, we have a fee, and the fee takes care of the utility. The general fund, this is where police, fire, administration, planning, economic development, parks, rec, library, those all live in the general fund. And the way we fund those operations primarily is property tax and sales tax. Those take up just over 50% of our general fund revenues. So when we start to talk about things that people choose to, I'm not going to spend as much. I'm worried about my job right now. That's going to make sales tax drop a little bit. That has effects on general fund operations. And again, those items that we talk about. So when I talk about these, well, why can't you just move some money out of the enterprise fund, say the utilities or the streets, to prop up the general fund? We can do that. It has to be done as a loan, according to accounting practices and the state auditor. And the loans do have to be paid back with interest. So that is kind of one of those downhill snowball issues, that if we're ever going to do a loan, it's got to be for something very short term, and the revenues are fairly assured. It is a tool in our toolbox. We did discuss it during the initial response to the pandemic. It's out there, but not something that's very long sustainable. So we keep that for emergency only, and we really talk about using reserves before we go that route. But at the end of the day, the general fund revenue, and the last piece for the whole discussion today, the airport is being left completely out of it. They have their own revenue source, they have their own expenses, they have very large construction projects. It skews some of the numbers. So I've kind of taken the airport piece and completely removed it, since they are their own separate operational piece. But our general fund income did come in higher than the budget by about $600,000. There's some reasons for that. A lot of it was the CARES grant, because we did receive all those awards in the $1.6 million. The original adopted budget used reserves to help balance that part of the budget. Those reserves were not needed. We were able to find it in curtailment of expenses, a little help with some additional revenue that we didn't expect in other places. And yeah, most notably that CARES grant. So some simple math, if you pull that 1.6 out, you're talking about $22.3 million. That's certainly below the balancing point. So the general fund revenues continued to propel the city. Some concerns with that, and I'll get on to some in the additional slides here. Libby, were there any questions on this horizon? Okay, outstanding. So sales tax revenue, and just for somebody that's never heard me speak on sales tax revenue before, it always comes in 2 months after it's collected. And the reason for that is like when I was in business, I grew up in the equipment rental business and operated the family business for 20 years myself. When April ends, I have until May 25th to put my reports together, figure out how much I owe, send that report off to the state, and then the state turns around and does their work on that and then submits it to the cities, the counties, and everything else the following month. So when we say there's a 2-month lag, that's why. So what you're seeing on this sales tax report is it being reported on a cash basis. That means when we receive cash, we can spend the cash. So instead of on this next slide, where I'll talk about accrual for a second, but we get money in April, we can spend money in April. And that's what we're looking at. What did 2020, what did the dollars look like that we received in 2020 that we could spend? So that $5.4 million was $479,000 over the projected budget. But if you look at that next bullet point, and this is one of those things I was alluding to on the last slide, is one-time sales tax from construction projects, all those big apartments getting built on the north end. Lumber getting delivered there, sales tax that the city is garnering, but once it's done, as opposed to going to the store and buying sponges or cleaning or dishwashing soap, as you can see what's on my mind right now. That number was up 82% over the previous year, 689,000. So if you back that off, we're below the $5 million. So the construction helped buoy us, as there's no two ways about it. Outside of that, if you look at what's left, you take out what the construction and the rest is retail, where you expect it to be kind of repetitive sales. That was down 258,000 over the previous year. And one of the numbers that we had come up with is that the sales tax that we generate through football weekends and other events like Mom's Weekend and graduation was about 300,000. So a lot of that can be directly or indirectly, I should say, indirectly attributed to not having those items in 2020. So it's something, sales tax, when I got here, was something that I started monitoring immediately because I knew it was our most volatile revenue source, because if there's nobody coming to town or everybody's holding their dollars, we watch that go down. So the first month I got here, I started reporting to the council every month regularly. Here's the sales tax, here's how it matched up, here's where it's putting us on the budget. So when COVID actually happened, it wasn't like a response to it. It was, all right, here's some additional detail, and we're watching this very carefully. So that's why council was able to react as quickly as they did too, because they had an idea of where our revenues continued to come through at. But that's a brief deal on sales tax on this end. Libby, is there any? All right, so here comes new slide number 1. I wish I would have put this on 2 slides now, but we're taking a little look here at comparison between sales tax collection by year and by month. Now we're looking at this more as an apples to apples. So when you see on the right-hand side, December sales tax, that is actually actual December, not December received for October. That was, okay, what happened that December? Oh yeah, that's right. It snowed like crazy. Nobody went out. So you can see that the sales tax collection by year on the left since 2010 had continued to rise steadily. We had that nice little pop of in 2018. A lot of that was construction related, as well as some large capital purchases in town. And I'm very vague on sales tax on purpose, and I apologize for this, but I get to look at the numbers and the businesses and what's going on. And part of that is because the Department of Revenue makes me sign a non-disclosure agreement. So I really can't tell you, like, Mike's Corner Store did this or that, because it's important that the businesses can continue to operate unfettered. So you'll hear me talk about categories a lot, but not specific businesses, and that there's a reason for that, and it's not just me being coy. But as you can see, 2020, if you go back to the previous slide, it's a little different number because, again, I was reporting on cash. What did we actually receive? Versus on this slide, we're looking at what were the activities that happened. We'll receive some more of the cash at all. It's just 2 ways of looking at it. And this is a very important view for the council to see, and something they like because they can actually go, oh yeah, when game day came to town in 2018, was there a little bit of a pop then? And so looking at that slide on the graph on the right makes a lot of sense for them. But as you can see, the right-hand side, there's a little bit of a cycle to the city. There's certainly its outliers, as you can see with the blue, because a lot of that was construction related. We had a very nice construction season last year in reporting. But generally, it's cyclic, we can see. So are there any questions on this before I go to the next? Okay. So now let's talk about property tax revenues a little bit. This is more reliable. We'll always collect our property taxes one way or the other. Either they're going to get paid through normal circumstances, or the county treasurer eventually, after so many years of non-payment, has to foreclose and do a tax sale on that property, and the minimum sale price is whatever's owed on it, including the property taxes. So we may get a little less one year and a little more the next year. We don't want to see that happen. That's a lot of that housing bubble from 2008, 2009 coming back. But our property tax collection for 2020 was very, very solid. The original budget was 7.7 million on that. A lot of that was based on projections by my predecessor as to where things would be. It was a little out of the norm, but it wasn't off by much. And that's why you see on these next 2 bullets, what is the collection rate versus the budget versus the collection rate for actual. So when we bring in new property and it gets added to the tax rolls, there was, well, we should be up to this by that time. So the collection rate to actual is really the most important number, because that tells us about the health of the community, while the collection rate versus the budget tells us how good were we at guessing. And those numbers are both very, very close. Another reason why it's critical to operations that we collect on property tax is that it's how we pay back the voted on bonds. So any short collections that we get on that, we have to go pull from other places until that until we're made whole. by the people that didn't pay. They'll pay eventually, but we may need to borrow from the reserve or some other places to fill that gap, so we continue to pay our debt back to the bank. So, you know, the property tax is 32% of our general fund revenue, where our sales tax is 21%. So, you know, 50% live in these two things. That's why we spend a lot of time. Everything else, certainly important, but these are the big movers. Any questions on this, Libby, before I move on? Okay. So property tax valuation for the community, the blue bars, Whitman County, and the black is Pullman. So you can see how over time, the valuations have continued to increase. Pullman a little flat only by way of comparison when you do something like this, but in 2020 our valuation did cross the $2 billion mark, and that's pretty significant when you think about there are certain real property that aren't taxable. Churches, government buildings, including, you know, hospitals and schools in the city, county, state, and also the university. So property taxes aren't collected on those, and our valuation has still reached $2 billion at this point. So it's you can see the growth, and some of it is through the assessor and the assessments. Other of it is just more new construction. We are growing like crazy around here. And part of the reason that I was attracted to come to a community like this is it's on the cusp of something big, and you can feel it. I can feel it as a newcomer. Okay, Libby, any questions on this one? All right. Okay, back to the revenue part of this. We're outside of the general fund now. We're going to talk about a couple of the enterprise funds. So the first one is the utilities with its dedicated revenue streams and its dedicated expenses. We charge for sewer, water, stormwater, and we provide sewer, water, and stormwater services. So we had a large spike, as you can see, in 2019, and that was a funds transfer for a lot of internal projects that we were doing, improving the system. 2020, just a little below budget, but some of it was as we curtailed some projects to preserve some reserves in the utilities, but these were not projects that would have caused further repairs, any type of problems downstream. These were things that could wait while we were in a better bidding climate, as well as our financial ability to perform the projects. Things are going well in the utilities. And again, one of the things that we did was the moratorium on the shutoffs, the interest and the fees. And this is something that I'm watching very carefully. It's being talked about regionally, how these dollars continue to grow in the 60, 90 days past due, to the point where community action has some dollars available for those who qualify to help them pay down some of the utility bills. So we've been working with some people to help them get in touch with community action for that type of help. So that's the utility fund. Questions on this one, Libby? Okay. Another very prominent enterprise fund is our transit service. We're one of the few cities in the state that has their own transit service. A lot of them are more regional, but we have a city one, and a lot of with the students being gone and the schools being remote, contracts were not enacted. So we had to slow down, and then you have distancing on buses. So we were able to pick up some additional buses where you'll see two of them kind of going around in tandem right now. So we can make sure we can accommodate the needs of the ridership and maintain the distancing that we need. So we've had to totally Wayne Thompson's done a very, very good job of rethinking and coming up with solutions to provide a very important service and maintain the needs of the city. And as you can see, we're down a little bit over the budget. Well, we're down a lot bit over the budget, but there are some FTA dollars to help stabilize us. But when you aren't performing contracts for WSU in the school district like we do, and we stopped taking fares because of the money counting and not knowing how the virus transmitted. Do we really want to count, $20 and expose our staff to that? So we put a stop to fares for a while there. Transit certainly felt its brunt of it as well, but the FTA dollars through the CARES Act that transit received were a lot more flexible than what was given to the city. They were allowed to do a lot more with revenue stabilization and other operations just to keep that part going because it was necessary infrastructure. Okay, Lydia, I'm ready to go to the next slide. Are there questions? Okay. So now we transition from bringing in money to watching the money go out. This is just as important, but a little less fun to talk about because there was expenditures, but there has to be. So our budget for 2020 for the general fund, again, those items, police, fire, the normal day-to-day type things, $24.8 million budget. We used 1.6 million of reserves to help balance that, which we didn't need to. Because we only spend 23 million out of that due to some rollbacks and taking operations into account and just being a little more thoughtful and seeing what we could put off. And even with that $23 million of expenditures, that includes the $1.6 million of CARES. So CARES was on a reimbursement basis. So until we spent the money, we didn't get the money. So we ramped up our PPE and wipes to get us through August on this dollar. Each of the departments went out and did their projection, all the plexiglass that you can see in different places. Any response to COVID, that $1.6 million is part of that $23 million expenditure, as well as part of our CIP dollars to finish new city hall. It was a fund transfer from a reserve account and it ended up living in this general fund account. So that was about $640,000 of that as well. So this is one of those moments that at the end of the year, Adam and I did have a conversation and it was not bad for our first pandemic. Okay, any questions on this one, Libby? Okay. So the utilities expenses, a lot like the income, we did have that spike of income because we had that spike in expenses in 2019. We were doing a lot of large projects. Again, the expense account was budgeted for almost double what we spent, but we weren't ready for projects yet. And this is very typical. Some projects get pushed off and slowed down because of not a good bid environment, or we can't find the right contractor, or we just weren't ready when we thought we would be. One of the things we did accomplish in the utility expenses, though, is we did finish the solar project on top of Building B here at the recreation center at the new city hall complex. So that's already, we're starting to see savings in our electrical bill from that. So that's the utility portion. Continue on, Libby. Okay. Transit, this is again how I was alluding to earlier, that their expenses would drop off because their services dropped off, and you can see it, $1.5 million right there on a $6.4 million budget, and that does include expenditures through the FTA grant. So we were buying their grant lives separate of ours, so they bought their own PPE, they bought their own plexiglass, so we can maximize the rest of the city since they had a chunk of funds that they could use on their own. So curtailed operations due to pandemic conditions. The demand for mass transit is still here in the city. As folks came back after the summer, we were seeing it a little bit, just not in normal operations. Continue on, Libby. Okay. And then I threw this one in here just as a moment to discuss. We have a couple internal service funds, and basically this is an enterprise fund only to the city. We are our own customer, and that's for our buildings department to make sure these buildings stay heated, stay the janitorial, any repair expense, the IT department, how it touches everybody. And ERD is our equipment rental division, and that's all the rolling stock, fire engines, police cars, whatever you see with the city logo on that. And each department pays them their fair share for their portion of operations out of their funds. But just wanted to take an opportunity to show that. And the big spike in 2018, that's when we purchased the land that the new city hall is on, that land in the building. So everybody pays their proportional share, and we do have people that staff these departments. So it is an expense across the board. So now we slip out of 2020 and we start talking about 21, 22 and looking forward. So the first one I have for you here is the general fund. This was the approved budget, $24,640,048. And as you can see, about 2/3 of that is in public safety between our fire and ambulance services and our law enforcement operations. Some of the other things, public services, these will be things like parks, recreation, library, community and economic development is that department, as well as our planning department and building inspections. And then administration would be, council, mayor, finance, HR, city attorney. So when you look at the general fund and how that breaks down, 24 million for 2021. And we treated 2021 when we asked our departments to go out, we want you to treat it a lot like what you curtailed on 2020 and assume 50% occupancy for football season, because football does drive the sales tax and the hotel motel tax in this town. And so we figured that we would be 50% occupancy for football games this year, and that would help us out financially. So a little behind the scenes for you on that when we were talking to them. Now, the general fund piece does fit into the overall city expense. And again, no airport in here. And if you look about midway on the left, you'll see in the yellow community and economic development, public services, fire, law enforcement, administration. So we've seen the general fund. Here it lives in the full $72 million. But then you also see transit, the internal service funds, our streets, and paying back and performing services that the community voted on with the bond, 2018 bond. So been through the whole process with council, and this is what we arrived at for a 2021 budget for expenses for the entire city. And how that relates to 2022, again, very similar. We had this very similar discussion with our departments, because we do a 2-year budget, biennial budget. And we said, imagine 2022 to be a lot like 2021, which is a lot like 2020, except 3/4 capacity for football season. And that was a little more pessimistic view than I'm used to doing. And I'm not really an optimist. I'm not really a pessimist. I'm a pragmatist. The glass is not half empty. The glass is not half full. The glass is twice as big as it needs to be. And so we went with a 3/4 capacity in the football stadium. We really expect to be back to full capacity, but again, it's a crawl, walk, run scenario. I'd rather be able to do more things as money becomes available because we know what projects are being looked at in the future versus, well, we planned for this, now it's not happening, sharpen your pencils and go find your cuts. Just a responsible way to go budget while there was that huge, huge unknown as to what a reintegration looks like. And again, the 2022 general fund, how it fits into the city expenses for $70 million. Again, starting with the yellow community and economic development, you can see all those funds coming through here. And the other pieces that have their own revenue source joining them for the full pie. So yeah, our utilities we bring in money, we spend money providing the services. So that's where this lives. This slide is also in the budget book, and I think it's very important every time I have a chance to talk about it, or I could talk about reserves. And that's that's Pullman's rainy day fund. And you can see that the red is still projected. We're still working on closing out 2020 and where we project 21 and 22 to be. And the actual ending balance, as you can see, for 2022 is just a little below City Council's goal amount, their unofficial, unadopted goal. And that was something that I talked to them an awful lot about when I got here, because the goal was a little lower than where my comfort level, my threshold was, because when I got here, we didn't have COVID-19. And I had survived as a member of city council, as well as a small business owner at the time, 2008 financial crisis. And what I saw from that is 2 months reserves tends to be a little more livable than an arbitrary number, because 2 months gives everybody something tangible to wrap their mind around. Because can we continue operating exactly as we are for 2 months while we're waiting for help? Yes. We also know that from most recent experience that we will start making changes immediately to stretch that 2 months out as long as we have, to continue to make sure essential services are delivered to the community. So some things, may not operate as usual, and we'll hold some operations back to continue to make sure the health and the safety of our community comes first, while we wait for somebody to step in and get help. And we think that was 2 months. And sure enough, the feds stepped in with the CARES dollars, and they're about to step in with the American Rescue Plan dollars to help buoy us a little bit and give us opportunities to continue these operations. And I say the feds because I really want to point out the fact that how our federal delegation went to bat for us, because to this day, we still have not received any state help. There is a rainy day fund with the state. We haven't heard a thing if that's going to be distributed or how that's going to come help our local communities. So we sit and we wait. So the 16% for the city goal, we're within distance. And I think by the time we close out the 2020 numbers, we'll be right at that 2 month goal at the end of this budget period. But one of the things that goal does not take into account is we have all 6 of our bargaining unit contracts expiring at the end of this year. So there is a cost of labor that I wasn't going to budget for, because we don't know what it is. We just know it's out there. And if I budget for 100%, then certainly the bargaining units know that that's what we have to give. And right now we're trying to just make sure that basic operations, and we continue to roll out more and more as the state allows us to bring our community back to what it's used to receiving. So that's my little point on reserves. I have 3 more slides. The next 2 are brand new. So where do your property taxes go? We've talked a lot about how we fund the city and what happens with that. But your property taxes, you get your tax bill, it's due at the end of the month, first half due at the end of April. Oh, there we go. So folks residing in the city of Pullman are paying about $15.14 per thousand of assessed value to fund all these things. Whitman County gets their $1.46 for their operations. Port of Whitman gets their 29 cents. The state of Washington, most of that is tied into those 2 school items that you see if you look at your property tax bill. So that's $3.47, as well as our hospital district, the school district, $4.91. And then there's the city of Pullman's portion. So at the end of it, the $4.45 of the 15 stays right here to provide services to our community. And of that 445, here's how it comes through. So you have your regular taxes, those go into the general fund at $3.23. There's the voted on EMS levy for 45 cents. So we use to help fund our fire and ambulance response directly. The bond repayback, 48 cents per thousand. And that's voted on City Hall, Austin Gardens, all the parks projects of the B bond. And then that last piece is the Metro Parks portion, the extra 28 cents that we use for parks enhancement projects. So of the 447, there's where the dollars go. And as you saw earlier, how the property taxes fund your services. Now, I didn't include a sales tax portion because it's a little less abstract. We pay 7.8% sales tax. So 78 cents on $10, 6.5 or 83% of that goes to the state. 6.5 cents per dollar goes back to the state for their operations. Our local retention is the 1.3 cents. That's the sales tax that we're talking about to help the general fund. So 16% of that stays home while the rest continues to fund bigger state projects.
Mike, just to let you know, people do have to go back to work. So we're at 12:55. So you got 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll jump into this one super quick. Your city services, it's costing per capita about $5.51 a day. Public Works takes up $2.84, where public safety is $1.33. Quality of life, those are your parks, rec, transit, library, planning, those things are $1.07, and then the basic overhead is 27 cents. So that's how your taxes come down to pay your $5.51 for today and each day until the next budget. So let me just pop these up. We did have some financial challenges over the year. The unanticipated sales tax refund of $600,000 that I'm sure everybody's heard about and me talking in the media. To date, we have realized $255,000 of that we were paying back on a monthly basis to the Department of Revenue. I have closed the gap from that $600,000. The amount I have left to find is $32,000. So as we continue to wait for the Department of Revenue to give us exact numbers, that number will continue to shrink. And again, there's no change in delivery of services. These are all be able to absorb organically, whether it's not filling open positions or cutting back on travel, which we're not doing anyway. The American Rescue Plan, dollars should be available and additional information should be available to us in the next couple weeks. Again, it's still very vague. We can use the dollars to respond to COVID. That's great as long as the state auditor agrees that our response to COVID is within the terms of the money that was given. So we got to be very careful of that before we just start spending money. Mentioned labor, something council continues to talk about for our community and we talk about as an organization is recovery, retention, and recruitment. And this is something that we're buying into as a city from the elected level all the way down to our deal. So how are we recovering? How do we retain what we have? And how do we continue to grow our community? And how do we get to a reopening and a return to normal, whatever the new normal is going to be? It's the health of the community. It's following the safety, the CDC guidelines, and caring for one another as a neighbor. And then just continuing to monitor our situation. And, when we go back a phase or we go up a phase, make sure that we're being smart, incremental. We don't want to go backwards. We want to see the success of this community. So I did well on the thoroughness and I apologize on the brevity. I will improve.
We do have a question in the chat. And Lennis, I'm going to ask you to read your question.
I can read it, Bobby, or do you want
Okay.
to, Lennis?
Well, no, I want Lennis to, because I don't
'cause
understand the question.
Okay, so we didn't really talk about this, but I am wondering in general, with regards to new and proposed developments and the required infrastructure costs to the city, how long in general does it take the city to recoup those costs?
In the past, it has taken a lot longer than I'd like to see it take in the future as we continue to develop out. And we're not a Growth Management Act county, so we have to take care of this during our SEPA process. So each development that comes in needs to pay their portion of that. So instead of having to absorb some of these projects with other city dollars, we can have the developer pay as they go. And because they are providing an impact to the city. And this goes to my point on why that $689,000 of sales tax on increased construction is important. Those types of dollars should be going towards one-time purchases as well to provide for the infrastructure of this increased development. And we're using it right now to, keep our heads above water. So as we look at these American Rescue Plan dollars, how do we backfill some of these things that we need to do? So having a robust SEPA process, looking at how these developers are impacting the entire mechanism that is the city infrastructure is very important. As far as a payback period, it varies with each project, and I don't have an exact number on the last one. So I don't want to shoot from the hip, but let me see if I can get something out for the betterment of the group. And maybe that's our baseline, but I know each project has been different because we've had different requirements of each.
Great. We are now at 1 o'clock and Libby, do you have any comments? Because we're at 1 o'clock and we're
And
gonna move
Hill
on.
wants to know about the remodel and maintenance for the new city hall. Is that all covered, Mike, with the bond that was passed?
The remodel and maintenance. The remodel is essentially covered, and I'll tell you what essential means. The maintenance is ongoing.
Okay.
So that part, the bond was never set up to continue the ongoing stuff. In any remodel, if anybody's lived through a remodel, when you start opening walls and doing things, you start to realize, we did not anticipate this. Yeah. And I've lived that very recently on my own end. Yeah. Now, the good news, if there is good news, that the interest, before the interest rates tanked during COVID, the interest that we were earning on the bond while we were waiting to pay for the work we were doing is covering most of these overruns. Some CARES dollars is covering some more. Our overruns are very, very minimal. And we're looking at other opportunities that we can come back, but we haven't had to steal from one bond to cover another. So far, things are rolling on pretty well. We ran a very tight project here.
Okay, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Bobby, this is Megan Guido. I know we're right at 1 o'clock, but I do actually have some questions of you, Mike, but I don't want to run over, and I might just talk to you offline. First off, I just want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting this together. It was really informative, Mike, and I appreciate the work and the overview. Just also want to let folks know that I just announced today that I am going to be running for City Council Ward 3. So I'm available to answer any questions and would love to talk to you more or present at the League of Women Voters coming up. So just wanted to let people know about that.
All right, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Megan, yeah, please do feel free to reach out to me.
So Mike, what is the SEPA process? You didn't ever explain the SEPA.
SEPA, it goes through our Public Works and Planning Department. They look at whatever the plan that has been turned in for a particular development is and say, does it meet the codes? Does it meet state and city ordinances? And
environmental codes, yeah.
yeah, and so it takes a full 360 look at it, and it says what, yeah, we could check this box, you covered this, or you know what, you haven't covered this, so we're going to make you do that. And this is where we talk about the infrastructure payback is you're going to create extra traffic on this road, and to help mitigate that, we'd like you to do this.
Okay, thank you.
And
And
it stands
stormwater.
for this, it stands for State Environmental Policy Act,
Yes.
which is a subset of the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA.
NEPA, SEPA.
Yeah,
Right.
and it touches a lot of hands, so it's not like, oh, does this get missed? Nicholas Merritt mentioned stormwater. Yes, our stormwater folks look at this as well. So everybody gets their piece, and this is the part to really, when you look at the development, what is the overall effects? This is the time to enact it, since we can't, or we don't have impact fees like a growth management county would have.
Right.
And they got to do their own SEPA process too. It's just an additional step.
Okay. Libby?
Fantastic, Mike, fantastic. You're a great presenter. All the detail we would ever want to know about our city budget and the revenue and everything else. So thank you. Thank you for looking ahead, helping us see into the future a little bit. And we'll all try to be as optimistic as you are, Mike, about the future. You're a very optimistic person. I appreciate that.
I like that about, he can feel it. He comes here from Mount Vernon and he can feel it. We're on the edge of something great. I always knew that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Great job, Mike.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
Mike.
It was a
It was
pleasure.
really great. And this recording will be available on the League website, I hope in the next week. And thank you, everyone. We're going to end the meeting now, and just go out and enjoy the sunshine and have a great day.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
organizing
Bye.
this.
Please reach out whenever.
Okay.
Bye.